So, first, some historical background on Cambodia in order to understand the causes that led up to the Cambodian genocide. So, the in the 60s, the Communist Party, Khmer Rouge, gained popularity. Um, at first, this was a national insurgency, but as the years went on, they gained more popularity. And then when the Prince Sihanouk was out of the country, there was a military coup led by Lone Nol, who overthrew and abolished the monarchy. Well, already there was unrest uh, in the rural peasant class because because they actually really liked the prince, and they were angry at Lone Nol. So with the monarchy abolished, Lon Nol created the Khmer Republic, and the country was already in turmoil because Lon Nol involved Cambodia with the U.S. and Vietnam. And with the Vietnam War, U.S. had a secret bombing campaign on Cambodia as well. So this led refugees to flee to the city in order to escape these bombs, and this only made the unrest among the peasant rural class even worse because they were forced to flee their homes because Lon Nol involved Cambodia in Vietnam. So there was also a civil war in Cambodia with this caused civil war in Cambodia between the Khmer Rouge, uh, who was backed by the prince, and then Lon Nol's government, which was backed by the U.S. But Lon Nol was already at a serious disadvantage because the U.S. withdrew their support later. They gave Lon Nol military and political support, but when they saw the disadvantage he was at with the against the Khmer Rouge, they withdrew their support. So this eventually led the Khmer Rouge, which was led by Pol Pot, to overthrow Lon Nol's government on April 17th, 1973. Um, After they overthrew the government, they wanted to turn Cambodia into a communist agrarian society, which makes sense because it was a communist party, and a lot of the support came from the rural peasant class. So this included abolishing religion, family, money, or anything else that Pol Pot considered to be a social evil. So this is a picture of right after Pol Pot overthrew Lon Nol, and this is a picture of the residents in cities being evacuated after the regime took over, and this was because he Pol Pot wanted to make Cambodia into an agrarian society, so it would make sense that he's evacuating all the cities and moving everyone to um, the rural areas. So the casualties of the Cambodian genocide, it was estimated that around 1 to 2 million people, and usually, from what I researched, it was around 1.3 to 1.5 million people lost their lives in the Cambodian genocide, which was actually a quarter of its population. At first, Pol Pot specifically targeted intellectuals because, as we know, the Khmer Rouge regime put heavy emphasis on the rural peasant population, and they felt as though these intellectuals were given special treatment in their old government, so that's why they were persecuted. This includes doctors, lawyers, teachers, and the clergy, and even people wearing glasses or speaking foreign languages were targeted because they, again, were seen as intellectuals. And these intellectuals were expelled from government or any powerful position, and then they would be assassinated or killed in the killing fields. This was again done in order to erase any signs of old Cambodia and to rebuild the new agrarian utopian society. As I said before, also anyone who was a representation of the old Cambodia was persecuted, so former government officials. Also, ethnic minorities were persecuted as well, which included Vietnamese, Chinese. Approximately half the Chinese ethnic population were killed under the Khmer Rouge regime, and also the Cham Muslims were targeted. So many of these casualties that we discussed mainly happened in the S-21 prison or the killing fields. And the S-21 prison was a torture center and a prison, and it also served as an interrogation center where any traitors of the government or supposed traitors were imprisoned, tortured, and then killed. 14,000 people have been imprisoned in this place, and only 7 have supposedly survived. The prison was surrounded by barbed wire and electrified fences in order to prevent prisoners from escaping. Most of the deaths that occurred in this prison was were party purges of the Khmer Republic officials who were charged with conspiring against the Khmer Rouge regime. This picture is actually of a torture room in the prison, and yeah, this is where they would torture, interrogate people. The killing fields of the Cambodian genocide. The killing fields, the name was actually coined by a Cambodian journalist who escaped the regime. And the killing fields were basically mass graves, which would hold up to 400 people who were taken to these fields and killed. These were usually prisoners who were first tortured and then taken to these fields to be executed. They would be executed with pickaxes, farming tools, and sharpened bamboo sticks, which they would dip in poison. They would also kill children and even infants as well. They would bash the heads of children or infants of adult victims against trees in order to kill them. And they would throw these kids' bodies with their parents. They did this because they didn't want these kids to grow up and then later seek revenge for their parents' death. And then these victims would be buried in these mass graves, hence the killing fields. So the aftermath of the Cambodian genocide and some of the resolutions that happened. Uh, the Khmer Rouge regime actually attacked Vietnam, which later led Vietnam to invade Cambodia in 1978, and they were able to overthrow the Khmer Rouge regime and end the genocide. They made the People's Republic of Kampuchea, and then this resulted in the political normalcy and the end of the genocide. But China and the U.S. still supported the Khmer Rouge regime throughout the 80s, and then later there was a ceasefire agreement in 1991, which caused the communist Khmer Rouge regime movement to stop. In 2001, there was actually a UN's Cambodia tribunal, which held many of the officials and people responsible in the murders during the Cambodian genocide. And this included the director of the S-21 prison, who was charged for crimes against humanity, and then he was later jailed for life.
So, one pretty important part of the Cambodian genocide was the way it was portrayed in the media in the West. So, it began when journalists staying in Phnom Penh and refugees at Thai border camps began to write about what they were seeing, give interviews about the atrocities of this genocide. And news about the genocide spread pretty quickly from these stories due to advancing technology in the 70s and 80s, and it eventually hit the US and Europe. And once it did, the media coverage was pretty divided. There, on one side, there were deniers, people who were saying that a lot of these reports and interviews were over exaggerated or false. And these were typically people who were against the US intervening in Vietnam and were trying to use it as a way to support their arguments. And on the other side, people were trying to use the genocide to support the US's anti-communist crusades and their belief system and saying, oh, this is why we went into the Vietnam War, into Vietnam, and why the war was overall a good thing. So So on the other side of the world, the media in Cambodia, all forms of media were banned when Pol Pot took over as sort of a part of his quote unquote purification of Cambodia, which I'll talk about a bit later. He shut down all newspapers, all telephone stations. People couldn't call each other or send mail to each other. So overall, there was no way people could see what was going on in the outside world or within their own nation, with all forms of media prohibited. And the Cambodian government used propaganda a lot in their reign, so it was pretty similar to propaganda used in communist China and the USSR in terms of the color schemes, kind of the messages, etc. You see, like in the one on the left, there's all types of people, soldiers, young children, women, trying to say all of us are equal in this cause. But specifically, they focused on the cleansing of society. An example of one that I saw was them saying what is rotten must be removed, saying which was their way of saying we need to get rid of anyone who is part of the old society so we can make way for the new one. In general, the international response to this genocide was really poor in the West. So this happened right after the US got out of the Vietnam War, and really the nation was in no state to go into Cambodia, according to US officials and the president. And while they denounced these atrocities when they first heard about it, no one really went in. And part of that could be due to the amount of skeptics and deniers of this genocide, but it was mainly in the US because of the economic and political state after the war. It was pretty rough. On the other side, obviously, the Vietnamese response to this genocide was going into Cambodia and invading it, like Anushka said earlier, and they eventually overthrew the Khmer Rouge. However, both the USSR and China tried to help Cambodia, so that was kind of their response to this whole situation, trying to help out a fellow communist nation. So just to tie up a couple loose ends here, it's really important to note how the Vietnam War played into the Cambodian genocide. So during the war, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was used by North Vietnam, and it bled into Cambodia and other Southeast Asian nations. So Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon decided to bomb the trail in Cambodia to try and cut it off. However, it just led to a lot of Cambodian casualties and obviously didn't achieve what the US wanted it to, because we still lost the war. And overall, it just weakened Cambodia, and the state of the nation allowed for the Khmer Rouge to take over because of how weak it was. And as I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to reiterate how the state of the US after the Vietnam War prevented them from taking direct action against the Khmer Rouge. Instead, they only denounced what was going on. So also, like I said before, people began using the Cambodian genocide in their arguments about the Vietnam War, whether they were for it or against it. And yeah, so another thing that's really important to note is how Pol Pot really designed his communist government as a Maoist agrarian utopia, which he kind of came up with after a visit to China and decided to have this radical experiment to see what would happen. So he created the Super Great Leap Forward, modeled after Mao's Great Leap Forward. I'm not making this up. And he put these policies into place when he took over by declaring that this is year zero, basically saying society was going to be purified. We're starting from the beginning. He believed in an extreme form of peasant communism. And as you can see in this document to the president from Cambodia, there was no education, no organized religion. Everyone had to do agricultural works. Kids were separated from their families. However, they didn't get to eat any of the food they made. There were no health standards. People would be out working for 16 hours. So in general, it was an extreme, extreme form of communism that really hurt a lot of people. So that's it for our presentation. Hope you guys are staying healthy and safe. And yeah, thanks for watching.